Welcome to Salty Woodworking. We're going to take this boring wall behind me and turn it into this beautiful built-in custom entertainment center. As you can see, there's going to be cabinets, floating shelves, a custom mantel, the whole nine by the time everything is said and done. I'm going to go ahead and mark out each one of the studs in the wall so we got a good place to secure the framing once we get that done. I got to go ahead and get this crown molding out of the way. I got my laser level set up just so I have a good line to go off of. This is one of those areas where having a multi-tool is so handy. I designed this entire thing in Fusion 360, so now it makes it easy for me to go ahead and go in and get my dimensions so I can start building the frame. I ended up bringing all my tools upstairs just to save myself some time from having to go up and down the stairs all day. And honestly, what's a better workbench than your flooring? Hindsight, there's a lot of things that I would have changed about the way that I framed this. One, I would not get screws that have Phillip heads on them because you end up stripping so many of them. Batman apparently wanted to make an appearance on this. Later on in this build, I ended up switching to a frame and nailer because I just got tired of stripping out screws. It became such a pain. I ruined a few bits in the process. Never use screws with a Phillips head. Honestly, I could have got some Torx bits and used those, but I cheaped out. I took the easy road. The ones with the Phillips heads happened to be like, I don't know, third of the price, quarter of the price. So trying to save some money on this project while I can, and kind of regretted it in the end. Now you can see why I wanted to cut out the crown molding. I wanted to get this to fit in here perfectly, so it has just enough of a gap for the shiplap on each side, which in the end didn't even matter because I ended up having to take off those side pieces of crown molding and mitering them. Crown molding was a super confusing and a little bit of a difficult thing for me to figure out how to do, but managed to get it to work in the end. I got this thing to fit in there, just perfectly. It was a little bit off a square, so I took the hammer and went hammer in place the way you're supposed to do it. And look at that, I'm making it look like I know what I'm doing. Since I marked out the studs earlier, I was easily able to grab my laser level, put that on the line, and then I had a good thing to go off of to make sure I had a good way to secure this to the wall. Just want to say, if you enjoy these videos, you enjoy following along, and if you want to see a more exclusive and kind of behind the scenes of things, I did go ahead and make a Patreon. It's a space where I'll be able to post things earlier, more stuff that doesn't wind up on YouTube, a way you can chat with me one-on-one if you want to, if you have questions that don't get answered in the comments. Also, any plans that I wind up putting out, they will be completely free on there. I'm planning on doing some giveaways at some point, which will be hosted on my Patreon. So that's another reason you could join, but if you can't, it's perfectly understandable. Just if you can, leave a like, subscribe, interact with the video. I try to reply to basically every comment that gets left, because at the end of the day, you guys are the reason that I'm going to be able to do all of this stuff. At this point, we got most of the frame out of the way. Just gonna make the front end for the fireplace and the TV mount and all that stuff. As you can see, I went ahead and grabbed the nail gun because I got tired of stripping screws. Here comes the first mistake of this build. Figured it out yet? Yeah, I did some math wrong. Don't really know what happened, but it was an easy fix. And here's a pro tip on how to keep your wife happy. Use your skill saw on a rug. She'll absolutely love it. In all seriousness, it was a pain to get all the sawdust out of the rug. But I went ahead and cut. It was about 2 or 3 inches off or so. So just cut that off of each end, nailed it all back together, put it up, problem solved. Sometimes it seems like I know what I'm doing. Oh boy. There's a key word I said there, if you caught it. Seems like I know what I'm doing. It's one of those good old things we all have, imposter syndrome. Well, maybe not all of us, but I know a good bit of us do struggle with that. You could tell me a million times I built the best thing in the world and I'll never believe you. But something I struggle with that, want to get better with one day. This is one of the parts of the project that I also would have changed. I over-engineered recessing the TV mount because I measured out that it needed to be 6 inches deep because that's how far out the mount came. But truthfully, I could have just recessed it about 2 inches and it'd been fine. But it's still strong and it's, not going anywhere. I said the thing, so it'll never go anywhere. This is part of the project that I thought was going to be hard, but it was super easy. As long as you made sure that your bottom board was straight, you just could roll with it. I mean, I checked a few times on the way up, just making sure it stayed level, but put one nail on the top, one nail on the bottom, go across the board, and it's perfect. The only part I had to change and trim was around the fireplace, which I just ended up taking a router with a flush trim bit and just going around it and cutting it out. And the fireplace went in perfectly with doing it that way. I'm sure somebody's gonna end up asking in the comments, but I used 1.5 brad nails for this project. You could honestly get away with using probably 1-inch brad nails if you really wanted to, but just wanted to make sure it's gonna be secured. I don't ever plan on leaving this house, so want to make sure this is gonna last 30, 40 years, so got it tacked in there real good. I'm going to do a full price breakdown on the final episode of this series, but I used 22 pieces of 12-foot long shiplap. I designed this so one piece of shiplap would wrap around the entire thing. It was just the cheapest way to do it. It still was almost $300 in shiplap. Shiplap is so expensive for whatever reason, but at the end of the day, I think it was very worth it. I absolutely love the way this thing looks. And for the corners, I just used this. It's like a PVC that I found from Lowe's. It's just a corner trim. It was like $10 a piece. So I used that, put that on each corner, and it covered up all the seams. Worked perfectly, painted really well too. Now it's time to get into the meat and potatoes of this project, the fireplace. It's from this company called Touchstone Products. They are based out of right here, the good old US of A. And they were kind enough to send over this fireplace for this project, which I'm so beyond grateful for. This is one of their many fireplaces, but this one is called the Sideline Elite, and it's about 60 inches wide. I'm going to tell you some more features about it in a little bit, but the install process was super simple. You took out these two screws, the glass face comes off, and then you can pop it in. There's also two more screws in here that you have to take off on each side, and it releases this little cover which gives you access to the holes to screw it into the studs. It still blows my mind just how realistic these flames look. The camera does not do it justice by any means. I ended up making in the opening just a tad smaller than it really should have been, so it took a little bit of persuasion to get it in there, but it all worked out in the end, and I got a tight and secure fit. All you got to do is you add two screws into the studs on each side, and that puppy's not going nowhere. One thing I like is they give you a few options on how you can decorate the way it looks on the bottom. So they gave me a big log set like this, a bunch of individual logs, and then crystals if we wanted to do like the crystals and individual logs. But the wife wanted the one log, so that's what we went with. And let's take a second to just appreciate how well the sticker comes off. You have three options on controlling this fireplace. There's a remote, there's buttons on the fireplace, and then you can use your cell phone, which is really cool because it can hook up to your Wi-Fi. So you can use Amazon Alexa and the smart things like that, and can control it from wherever you're at in the house. This fireplace has 2 different heat settings, 6 flame color options, 10 different settings for the logs, so like the embers you can change the colors on. You could also change the speed of how the flames are, and it's also got an 8-hour timer. We're in the midst of summer here in Louisiana, so I haven't really tested out the heating of it too much, but it's supposed to be able to heat up a 400 square foot room pretty well. So when wintertime comes around, we should be able to be nice and cozy with this thing. As you can see, my baby girl loves it, and I think if you were to get one, you would too. I'm going to have a link in the top of the description where it'll take you to Touchstone's website. It is an affiliate link, so if you purchase anything, it'll put a little change into my pocket, which, helps me make these videos. And now we're off to the final touches. Just got to add the crown molding to the top. Add some caulk to, hide all the gaps because I'm not a trim carpenter and I have no idea what I'm doing. And then paint the whole thing. I didn't record the process of me painting this thing because I painted a white and it didn't really show up too well on camera anyway. So just trust me that I got painted. So this is a project that I originally thought was going to be super challenging and very difficult for me to do. But For once, everything went smooth. Unlike these 4/4 boards of walnut, as you can see, they're not quite smooth. So we're gonna go ahead and pull out the planer. I got it on my nice little cart that I had made, and we're gonna get these boards all planed down and squared up and ready to start this project. While a planer is not completely necessary for this project, it does help, but you could always buy lumber that's surfaced on all 4 sides already, so you don't have to do this. But from my local lumber yard, they were a little bit rough coming out of the mill, so I went ahead and planed them down and got them squared up. Now you can see all the boards are nice and flat, same dimension, and they're ready to go. Everything in my shop is on casters for a reason. I don't have the most room, so I put the planer and the joiner on one cart so I can pull it out, use the planer on one side, twist it around, and get to the joiner. A joiner is definitely going to be the next tool that I go ahead and upgrade, because this one, it gets the job done, but I don't love it completely because the fence is aluminum and it's got a little bit of flex to it. But just like the planer, a joiner isn't necessary for this project. Like I said previously, if you get lumber that is already S4S, it'll save you a lot of time on having to mill up your own lumber. And if you don't have the tools, it's the way to go, but you pay a little bit more of a premium. This is the part of the project that I was most concerned about because I have a very cheap table saw that's not the most accurate, but cutting these 45s, I was just worried it wasn't going to go good. But as you can see, I have a featherboard set up, and I made sure to take my time and go as slow as I had to get a good cut. And in order to make this mantel, I had to put a 45 on 3 of the 4 sides of this board, and I used a table saw to make the long runs, and then we move on a little bit to the miter saw to cut the ends at a 45. I learned a lesson cutting these 45s on the miter saw. Make sure you always have a sharp blade, because I had a bit of deflection because the blade is so dull on here, and it caused a little bit of problems later on, but I was able to fix them. Now that we have all of our 45 cuts, the moment of truth is here to see if they actually line up and work together. This is the part that I was the most nervous about because I just did not think that I was going to be able to get them to line up. And you can see the boards have a little bit of a warp to them, but since they're so thin and so long, I was able to press them together pretty easily. Also, with them being as long, it's hard to get clamps on them, especially with them being 45s. So I ran masking tape, just your normal painter tape, all the way down, and that's going to act as a clamp. Here's the moment of truth. Let's see if it goes together. Cool, would you look at that? It actually came together. I was so happy at this point because I really did not think that it was going to work, but it did. So now it's time to lock it all in, glue it up, and let it sit overnight. Also want to shout out that glue bottle. It is my favorite glue bottle you can possibly get. It's like $8 on Amazon. I'll put a link down in the description if you want one, but no having to hit it and try to get glue out. It's ready to go all the time. I absolutely love it. I was shocked on just how well these 45s turned out right after glue. There were some gaps, which in a minute I'll show you how to close them up really easily from a trick I found online, but we're gonna go ahead and get the ends put on. I had a scrap piece of walnut that I planed down when I planed the rest of the boards. I also cut the 45s while I was cutting the other boards for the main part of the mantel. Now I just need to mark it and cut them to size. Hindsight, I wish I would have done this in the initial glue up. That way it would have completely ensured everything was square. I was just kind of rushing a little bit, and it's my first time making a mantel, so I second guessed myself on making it fit correctly. But surprisingly, everything went smoothly and it went together fine. But if it was off 90 just a little bit, it would have made things a whole lot harder. Just like the rest of the mantel, we're going to use masking tape as clamps here. It's insane just how strong masking tape is. Now it's time to go ahead and move on to the frame that's going to hold it onto the wall and kind of act like a big floating shelf. So I'm taking this 2x4 and ripping it down to the internal dimension of the mantel. I bought this 2x4 from a big box store, so of course it was warped, but we managed to get it to go in. So now I'm just going to go ahead and cut it to length, get it to squeeze in there just right. I then went ahead and cut the blocks. This is going to go onto that long piece of 2x4 and is going to be the main support for holding the entire mantel up. I just used a decent amount of glue and some 18 gauge brad nails. I think I used about 1.5 inch long brad nail to hold everything together, and it's really just to tack it down until the glue dries in place. And boom, look at it, it fits in there nice and flush, and that's going to give it great support once we hang this on the wall. If you've stuck around this long, leave a comment below and let me know if you want shop sounds or not. I know some people are a little bit against it, some people want it. Just kind of leave your thoughts down below. I'm trying to figure it out myself. As you can see, not all the 45s turned out great. So a little trick on how to fix this is you just take a piece of metal. I found a screwdriver, seemed to work out perfect, and you just kind of round them over. It's almost like it burnishes the wood together. And once you get to the sanding stage, you could put a little dab of glue on there, take off your dust collection, and sand just kind of close to the 45s, and the gaps completely disappear. And now it's time for everybody's favorite task, sanding, which wasn't too bad for this one because I only went through 2 steps. I started with 80 and then went up to 120. Reason being the finish I used, they only recommend going up to 120, but more on that in a little while. Once I got done sanding the mantel, I went ahead and took mineral oil and wiped it down with a shop rag. That gets all the sawdust out of the pores and gets this thing ready for finish. Speaking of finish, this has to be the absolute easiest finish in the world to use. I'm not sponsored by them by any means. I do have an affiliate link in the description, which I get a little bit of cash for, but they don't pay me a single penny to talk about this finish. I just want to shout them out because it's so easy to use. It's a simple 3-to-1 ratio, so you get just some little syringes and a mixing cup. I did 30 mils of the first part and then 10 mils of the second part, and that got me my 3-to-1 ratio. You actually don't even have to use both parts if you don't want to. Just the accelerator helps accelerate the cure process, so you can actually use whatever it is you make a little bit faster. But if you use both parts, according to the label on the bottle, it's only a 24 to 36 hour wait period before it's fully cured and you can use it for whatever you want to. This here is the reason why I'm saying it is the easiest finish in the world to use. It's so easy to put on. All you do is you take a little squeegee, or you can use a shop rag or any kind of rag that you want to, and you just wipe it on. It's a wipe on, wipe off process. Now it is not as durable as say like a polyurethane, because this is a hard wax oil finish is what they consider it as, but it's more than durable enough for most of your furniture that you're going to use inside of your house. Once you get all the finish put on, I like to use a buffer with a white pad on it, and this just kind of helps push the finish into the pores. It also gives it more of an even coat because it wipes off all the excess that you have laying around. After that, all you gotta do is wipe it off, let it sit for a day or two, and she's ready to go. Now it's time to add this mantle to the built-in, which if you didn't check the last episode out and see me build the first part, go ahead and check it out. It'll catch you up to speed. Using that 2x4 bracket makes it super easy. Found a few studs, made sure it was level, screwed it in, and now the mantle just slides on super easy. To be honest, I probably don't even really need to put a screw in the mantle itself to secure it, but I went ahead and did that anyway. I took a countersink bit and drilled a hole on each side, making sure I was going into the bracket, and I'm going to use a screw on each side just to make sure this thing never comes off unless I want it to. I feel like this project has taken so much longer than I ever imagined it was going to. Actually, let's play a game throughout this video. Count the amount of outfits that I've worn. This was by far the longest part of this project. I am by no means a professional cabinet maker, but I know just enough to build some pretty simple cabinets. So it's time to get out the track saw and cut this beautiful birch plywood down to size. This little attachment you see me using here is by far the best like $30 I've spent on Amazon. They have a lot more expensive options, of course, that you can get, but this one was $30 on Amazon and holds your track perfectly 90 degrees. Check in the description. I'm going to go ahead and put a link down there for that piece. So I'm making some pretty simple cabinets. They're about 30.5 inches tall, 30 inches wide, and I'm making them about 20 inches deep. I'm using my track saw here to go ahead and cut these pieces of birch down to their final size. It's just a lot easier to manage than trying to cut this down on the table saw by yourself. These cabinets will not have a back to them, so I'm going ahead and taking the extra pieces of this plywood that I had ripped down and rip it down to about 3 inches wide, and I'm going to use that for runners for the top and the back just to make sure it holds everything square. Now we have all of our pieces cut to make up both cabinets, and it's time to start assembly. I'll be using my Craig Pro 720 pocket hole jig to go ahead and get started. Not sponsored by them at all. I just absolutely love this jig by them. It makes drilling pocket holes just absolutely seamless. I made sure to drill the pocket holes on sides that you won't see, that'll either be hidden by the top or the bottom. This has always been the hardest part for me, is starting to put the cabinets together by yourself. It's just a little awkward to try to hold everything in place. But usually once you get 1 or 2 screws in there, it gets a whole lot easier to hold everything together. Lucky me, I got this thing square on the first try. I made some 2x4 toe kicks off camera, And in order to get them to fit, I needed to go ahead and cut out the existing baseboard to get them to fit in place. I feel like the multi-tool is just like the best tool to use for this. Super easy to cut. Then you just run your razor blade and then you can pop the baseboard straight off. Once I had the toe kicks in, I went ahead and brought the carcasses for the cabinets upstairs. Just since I'm doing this in the built-in, it's gonna make it a whole lot easier to build most of it in place. So it's time to get started on the face frame for these cabinets. I bought some 1x6 pieces of poplar from my local lumber yard. And for the most part, they're pretty square from the yard. I just rather go ahead and dimension them down myself just to make sure they're all nice and square. Once I had these pieces of poplar dimensioned, I took them over to the table saw and cut out 1.5 inch strips, which I'm going to use to make the whole face frame. Once I had them ripped down on the table saw, I took them to the miter saw and cut them down to size. And to attach them, I'm just using wood glue and some simple 18 gauge brad nails. I would like this face frame to look as seamless as possible, so I'm using some good old wood filler just to go ahead and fill in the gaps in all the nail holes, and once that dries later on, I'm gonna sand it down. Now that the face frame is done, it's time to go ahead and get started on these doors. I'm using that same poplar that I mentioned down earlier to make up my stiles and rails, which I'm ripping down to about 2.5 inches. I'm using this setup block to set the blade height to roughly 3/8 of an inch. This is going to allow me to put a slot within my stiles and rails for a 1/4 inch piece of plywood. I run all my pieces down one way and then I flip them over, and after some trial and error, figure out what the perfect size is to fit on this 1/4 inch piece of plywood without it being too snug. Once I get that groove dialed in, we're going to move over to the crosscut sled and go ahead and cut out the tongue to fit perfectly in that groove. It came out a bit of a tight fit, but I ended up taking a chisel and just shaving off a hair just to make them fit in a little bit more smooth. Now I'm gonna go ahead and bust out the track saw again, and I'm gonna cut the inside panels out of some of this 1/4 inch plywood. Now that I have all the pieces for the doors cut, it's time for assembly. This part can be a little bit tricky, but as long as you did your math right, it'll usually go together pretty smoothly. I'm using a whole bunch of wood glue here because I don't want these doors to move at all. The gaps on these things weren't completely perfect, but later on I'm going to fill them in with wood filler anyway, so it's a seamless look. But for the meantime, we're going to go ahead and clamp these things up and let them sit overnight. Now these doors had 24 hours to sit, so the glue is completely cured on them, and these doors are strong and they're not going nowhere. It's time to bust out the wood filler again. We're gonna go ahead and fill in all the seams on these doors, just so once it's painted, it looks like one solid piece. I let the wood filler dry for about an hour or two, and then I went ahead and took them over to the drum sander. This here is most definitely a luxury tool, but can save you so much time. So this way I went ahead and flattened the doors completely and got all those joints cleaned up. After the drum sander, I went ahead and took out the orbital sander with some 80 grit to start getting out at the drum sander lines. And then after that, I went up to 120, so then we're ready for paint. I promise I'm not sponsored by Craig, I just like their products. But this is another one of their jigs for cabinet hinges. It's so easy. You just clamp it on, drill your holes, and then you're ready to go for your cabinet hinge. I'm using 1/2 inch overlay door hinges for this project. These are just some cheap hinges I got off of Amazon. They're cheap, but they work great. I'll tell you a bit of a secret here. On the video, it looks like these cabinet doors go on perfectly fine with no issue. I actually made them about 1/2 inch too wide, so I had to take them off, go back downstairs, and cut 1/2 inch off of them. This was another part of the project I made a mistake. I'm putting on some Kills primer here using a normal bristle brush. I later on found out it's a terrible mistake because it dries so fast it just left a lot of texture. I ended up taking them back downstairs and then using a random orbital with a 320 disc on it and just sanding them down as much as I could and repainting them. Learning from my mistakes for the actual cabinet paint itself, I ended up using a foam roller and a foam brush to finish the paint off, and this came out beautiful once it was all said and done. While the paint's drying, we go ahead and start making the tops for these cabinets. I'm using 5/4 hard maple here. Reason being is most of the furniture we have in our house has a maple top on it, so I just want to keep up with that theme. Just like the poplar, for the most part this hard maple was pretty well square. I just prefer to mill it down myself so I can make sure that everything is nice and flat and I get solid joints throughout the entire top. Now that all the boards are dimensioned, I'm gonna go ahead and start sorting them out on how I want the top to look. Once I get them sorted, it's time for the fun part of gluing these puppies up. While waiting for the glue to dry overnight, I started making a template to get these tops to fit in here. I just grabbed some scrap wood I had laying around the shop in this little washer, and I'm going to use that washer to scribe. I seen this trick one time on TikTok like months ago, and ever since then it's stuck with me and I use it every chance I get just because it's so easy. Once I got the lines scribed in, I went ahead and took these boards back downstairs and used my spindle sander to go just up to the line to get it a nice solid fit. After that, I just used some of these scrap boards I had laying around to tie in these two pieces of plywood together with some brad nails. It took me a while to figure out how I was going to get a template for this top, but this worked out better than I could have ever imagined it was going to. So I was able to take this template, go over to the top, mark the lines, and then cut it out with a track saw. By the way, if you are in the market for a track saw, I highly recommend this Milwaukee one. I know it's more of the higher end price tag, but I've had no issues with it and it cuts through this maple in one pass like it's nothing. This thing is an absolute power horse. It's time to move on to everybody's favorite part and sanding these tops down and getting them ready for finish. I started with 80 grit because I also ran these through the drum sander, and it took a long time to get these drum sander lines out, but at the end of the day it wound up so smooth. I'm using a 45-degree chamfer bit to chamfer the bottom of these tops, and then on the top side I go ahead and use a 1/8 round over bit just to knock off the edge and make it not so sharp. Once I got the profile that I wanted done, I went ahead and moved over to 120 for the sanding. Reason being, I will be using Rubio Monocoat for the finish, and they only recommend to go up to 120 grit. Once I get done with sanding, I take some mineral spirits and wipe down the tops. This gets all the sawdust out of the pores and just gives the finish a better adhesion. It also gives you a sneak peek at the final product. Now that the boards are prepped, I'm going to use these little paint triangles and set the boards up so I can start the finish process. Like I said before, I'll be using Rubio Monocoat to go ahead and finish off these tops. This is their pure color, and it's, as usual, the simple 3-to-1 ratio. As you can see, I'm kind of eyeballing it here, but it still turned out great in the end. Once you mix your two parts, you just go ahead and stir them up real good, and then you're ready to apply your finish. For bigger flat projects, I like to use a DA polisher to apply the Rubio. I don't quite know if it's recommended or not, but I just feel like it's a bit easier, and I always seem to get a pretty even sheen throughout the entire surface whenever I use a polisher. I apply the finish on the bottoms first, so that's the good part of these little paint triangles. Now I can just flip it over and go straight to finishing the top. I let these tops sit for a full 24 hours so the finish can cure completely before installation. To get started on this project, I'm going to take a 2x12 and rip them into a bunch of little strips that are about 1.5 inches wide. These strips are going to be used to make our brackets for our floating shelves. It's a super simple and easy way to make brackets instead of having to buy some. Cutting them down to size, I am leaving myself about 1 inch of playroom, just so if I happen to make the shelf a little bit too small, I still have some playroom and can get it on there with no problem. Putting these brackets together, I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. I'm just using some good old wood glue and some 2-inch brad nails. And the brad nails are just acting like a clamp. They're not really adding too much strength. The glue is going to be the strength behind these brackets. It's time to mount these puppies to the wall. And of course, instead of grabbing a ladder, I'm just going to go ahead and stand on the cabinets. They're pretty strong, so that's a good point. I'm just going ahead and countersinking these screws. I'm just using 2.5-inch interior screws to mount them to the studs. I'm trying to hit as many studs as I can, and I'm also screwing into the side of the shiplap. For this project, I'm using 3/4-inch plywood. This here is maple plywood, which of course you could use any plywood, any species that you would like. Just I have a lot of projects in my house that were done with maple, so I'm kind of just trying to keep up with that theme. I'm gonna get started by taking my good old Milwaukee track saw and ripping down these pieces to the desired width, which I actually ended up cutting them an inch oversized what I had planned. That way when I go to scribe the wall to make them fit perfectly, they'll be just the width that I want them to be. After that, I took it to the miter saw and went ahead and cut them just an inch over the final size that I'm gonna need. These shelves will be made with miter folds, but since 2 sides are against a wall, I only have to put 45s on 2 of the opposing sides. Make sure before you decide to cut your 45s that you pick which side of the plywood you want to be the top or the bottom. That way you have the good side facing up. Now that I have the 45s cut on the top and bottom of the floating shelves, I'm going to go ahead and cut the front and sides. Using the same plywood, I'm going to go ahead and cut them down to the thickness that I want the shelves to be, which for these shelves I decided to go with about 3 inches thick. So I went ahead and cut 45s on both sides, and then I'm going to go ahead and take them over to the miter saw and cut 45s on one end. You'll see how all this comes together once we start to glue everything up. I find this the easiest way to get an accurate measurement for your cut without having to do math. Just set it on top, line up the edges, and mark it on the bottom. After that, you can take it to the miter saw, cut it, and then it's the perfect size. Now that we have all the pieces cut to the correct size, we're going to go ahead and glue it up. I'm using Titebond 3 to glue this up. No specific reason other than it's what I have laying around in a big old gallon bottle, so I'm gonna go ahead and use it. No clamps will be involved in this, just using some good old masking tape to act as clamps. After letting the shelves sit overnight, it's time to go ahead and pull the tape off just to see how everything turned out. Off camera, I took the shelves and brought them upstairs and put them on the brackets and used a pencil to go ahead and scribe the wall. Here I'm taking a track saw and just following that line so they fit perfectly against the wall. Now here's the fun part, putting the LEDs into these floating shelves. I made a quick and dirty template just using some scrap wood I had laying around, I just simply took the diffuser channel that I'm going to be using here and sandwiched it between two boards and then just locked them in together. That way I got the perfect width with the pattern bit, so these diffusers fit in there perfectly. The only downside of using a router is you do have to go back with a chisel and clean up the corners, but it only takes a couple of minutes. Now that I got the diffuser fitting in there perfectly, I just need to cut it down to size. And the good part about an aluminum channel is you can use your woodworking tools to cut them. So I just took it to the miter saw and went ahead and cut them. After making sure that they fit in there perfectly, I went ahead and took some CA glue, sprayed some adhesive on the diffuser, stuck them on there, and now they shouldn't go anywhere. For this project, I will be using LED strips that are called SK6812 LED strips. They're from BTF Lighting on Amazon. I'll make sure to leave a link down in the description, along with the diffuser I use and the controller I use. I'm not going to go in depth on this video on the wiring and the programming of these LEDs, but I'm using a WLED controller. If you're interested to learn more about it, you could look it up on YouTube, but if you want me to make a video about it, just let me know in the comments and I can definitely get started on working on that. The great thing about WLED is you can literally control every single LED on an individual strip. So it's super programmable and you can do all kinds of super cool options with it. Plus it connects to Wi-Fi, so you can use Alexa and everything else with it. Here you get a look at what the program looks like. You can control everything, the lightings, there's different effects. You can go to different segments so you can control certain LEDs. It'll go with the music. It's a crazy program that's definitely worth learning if you're into LEDs. But let's move on to the finishing process. Before I get to sanding, I'm gonna go ahead and round over the corners with a metal screwdriver, but you can use anything that's metal and round and you just kind of brush it over. It burnishes the wood almost and closes up all those corners. With this being maple plywood, I'm being extra cautious to do a very light sanding. I don't want to take off too much of the veneer. So I'm just using 180 grit and kind of lightly going over everything just to make it a little bit smooth. Let's put some finish on these things just to see how pretty this maple turns out. I'm using some paint triangles so I could finish the top and bottom at the same time. And I'll be using none other than the beautiful Rubio Monocoat. It's super easy, 2-part, 3-to-1. You mix 3 parts of the main pure and then 1 part of the accelerator. I know the price tag on Rubio scares a lot of people away, but it goes so far. I'll be able to finish all 3 of these shelves with just a little bit of Rubio that you see on the picture there. If you stuck around this far, thank you. Please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment, engage with it, whatever it is that you want to do, or dislike it and let me know in the comments what you didn't like. I'm trying out some music in this video, which is something I don't normally do. Please let me know if you enjoyed the music choice or not. I can go back to just the voiceovers with no music. I just kind of wanted to try something new just to see how it would turn out. Now let's put them on the wall. All I did was slide them in and then put a few screws towards the back just so they're held in place. We're about to get to the reveal, which you'll see I have the other side of the built-in shelves done. I did them off camera just because they were a pain because they were in between the wall. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Get out of your shop and build something, and as always, stay salty.